Hello, and welcome to Voices from the Institute for Human Rights and Business. In this podcast, you'll hear from people working to make respect for human rights part of everyday business. I'm Haley St. Dennis, IHRB's head of Just Transitions. Just Transitions being this idea that you can achieve not only a cleaner and greener future through decarbonisation, but also a fairer one. And when we talk about a just transition, housing and the built environment are often one of the most overlooked systems. And yet they shape our daily lives more intimately than energy grids or supply chains ever will. Too often interventions are focused only on emissions or materials, but at its heart, a just transition in the built environment is about people, their livelihoods, security, dignity, and the power to shape a fairer future. So in this episode, you'll hear from Adama, Lucia, and Nacho, residents and workers in Barcelona, Spain, who feature in IHRB's Just Stories series, which explores how just transitions are unfolding in real places with real people around the world. But before we listen to that story, I wanted to speak with someone who deeply understands the ecosystem behind it, how Catalonia is reimagining housing not as a commodity, but as essential social infrastructure, and how the different actors involved in that, be it public authorities, private sector players, various social actors, are collaborating to bring it to life. Ainara Fernandez leads IHRB's work on the built environment and human rights in Spain. An economist by training, she has spent her career really championing rights-based approaches to the places where we live and work. Ainara, thank you so much for joining us.
My absolute pleasure to be here, Haley. Thanks a lot for having me.
So, jumping right in, what drew you to essentially pitching this story to the Just Stories project, and why does this story matter right now?
I think that what drew me to pitching this story in the first place is how present the housing crisis is as part of our daily lives. No matter if you live in Barcelona or if you live in the US or if you live in any other city across Europe, Asia, or Africa, the housing crisis is affecting you at the moment in so many different ways. And I can feel how the gravity of the situation is really driving people to feel helpless and hopeless. And I think that this is something that is extremely dangerous for democracies and for living in peaceful societies where we coexist in a prosperous way. I live in Barcelona. I am not originally from Barcelona, but I live in Barcelona. I've worked here for over a decade now, and I could sense that something different is happening in Barcelona and in the Catalan territory. There's a concentration of innovation. There's a concentration of different social and environmentally sound housing projects that a decade ago, they looked just like punctual little utopias. But nowadays, in 2025, this is something different. There's something different that's happening in Catalonia that can bring hope to all of us who are affected by housing in our daily lives.
And so, how are local actors framing this crisis or its urgency? As you say, it's quite hope-based.
I think that different actors are framing the crisis in access to adequate housing in different ways depending on who they are. But I think that something that the story that you're going to be listening to now explains very well is how all different actors, they share one specific need, which is to innovate in the way that we build, we renovate houses, the types of houses that we build and renovate, the people who can live in those houses, the people who work in those housing projects, and all these different actors, be they social actors, be they private, for-profit actors, be they public actors, they all share this need to innovate. And in Catalonia, what we're seeing is that as a result of really understanding that this is a common need shared by all actors, conversations that used to be very rigid in the past have now turned into fruitful collaborations. And as a result of those specific collaborations, we will listen to the stories of Adama, of Nacho, of Lucia, whose lives have been drastically improved. But just focusing on common sense and by focusing on understanding what brings us together across different actors.
So you've described this as an ecosystem, but not in the ethereal intangible sense. Really, what you're saying to me is there's a power in the ecosystem because of the myriad tangible projects that are bringing the vision of an alternative housing system that marries energy efficiency and affordability in really tangible ways. So can you give us an example, or is there kind of a moment or partnership that you would say really kind of encapsulates the ecosystem nature of this transition in Barcelona?
So if we went and visited one of the housing projects that is led by a housing association called Habitat 3. This is a new actor. In this case, Habitat 3, they partnered with an energy supplier called Ariston that developed a specific kind of heat pump that could go into the homes that were retrofitted in this previously empty building, which was a historic patrimony of the city. So this entailed a design challenge because you cannot put a heat pump on a facade that has this kind of historic patrimony protection. So this innovation was a challenge for Ariston itself. So because of this strategic partnership that they entered with Habitat 3, they developed a new kind of heat pump. And that heat pump they now sell, that was developed specifically for this product. And it's not only that entering into this kind of new partnership led to innovation within the private business. Some of the workers that we spoke to, they reported that knowing that they were engaging in a housing project that had a social purpose, this also brought a lot of motivation for the workers inside of Ariston too. And Ariston is aware of this and they value this kind of motivation too. So as you can see, there's interest in all of the parties involved in these new kinds of agreements for delivering housing projects that have a social and environmental impact. And this, to me, is really important in terms of the kind of hope that I, for example, get from listening to this story. It's not hope that is dependent on an electoral cycle. It's hope that stems from knowing that there is actors in whose interest it is to establish meaningful collaborations that can be sustained in time and that can be upscaled.
I love that example of Ariston and the market innovation that came out of constraint, essentially, what you describe as a protected historic building, which is a very transferable lesson across, I think, much of Europe's housing stock, if not more globally, where you're limited in what you can do to mess with the building, essentially. But at the same time, you need to provide heating and you need to provide efficient heating. And Ariston's innovation now, from our understanding, is one of the most efficient being offered on the market. And that came as a result of this partnership with Habitat Trace. An amazing example. In terms of, I guess, lessons for different audiences listening, whether they are in public authorities, they're private developers, or in various parts of the private sector value chain, or organized civil society, what's in it for them? What are the kind of practical lessons each one of those can take away?
I think that one lesson that I believe it can be interesting for all actors is that there is no red button. There is no silver bullet. There is no such thing as a simplified solution to the housing crisis. However, precisely because of that, whatever it is that each actor does is important. And I believe that if we break it down for social actors, what's important is what we've heard from people themselves. I think that hearing from Adama, hearing from Nacho, hearing from Yusia, but we also heard from so many other residents, and we also heard from the people working for the different organizations making these projects happen. We heard from all of them. And, it's very encouraging to listen firsthand to how impactful these kinds of projects are in terms of improving people's quality of life. I think that that's a key lesson for me. And, we can be intellectual about it. We can talk about climate change in a very abstract manner. And we can talk about the decarbonization of the built environment in very technical terms. And that's fine. But it doesn't compare to hearing about Adama being comfortable in her house after everything that she has gone through, facing insecurity of tenure, being about to be evicted. There's nothing like hearing her say, I am fine. It's very warm in the summer. It's getting even warmer, but I am fine. I close the windows in the winter and I am okay. I feel well in this house. There's nothing like that. For private businesses, I think that there's important lessons in this story in terms of not looking at social needs and social demands as constraints or as, oh, this is one extra thing that I need to take care of. I am already so pressed with climbing costs that are eating up my margins. For me, there's a lesson here that shows how social demands are actually the needs of people and how those can really show the way in terms of innovations that those firms that are able to read social demands in this key, those innovations that these firms can lead. And there's plenty of examples of that in the story. Not only the example of this energy firm that we have just talked about, but there's examples of developers like Grupo Salas who are understanding how focusing on the productive dimension of producing housing as opposed to the speculative dimension of producing housing is a fantastic business strategy. We're now talking about one of the largest developers of Catalonia that has understood that it's a much smarter business case to focus on building houses that are affordable and that are sustainable. So to really fulfill the social need that exists for that kind of housing, then focusing on short-term profit that will not make them resilient to potential future shocks as a firm that wants to stay in the territory and that wants to continue doing business in the territory and expanding as a firm here. So there's a lot of lessons along those lines for private businesses in the story that I think are very telling.
And I think in some ways that almost challenges common assumptions, or maybe put another way, what excites me about the Barcelona model is the scale it has achieved in a short period of time that you just positioned as a real business opportunity. I think it's one of the first really concrete examples of just transitions, the social and climate agendas creating new market demand. And for those businesses that are thinking long-term about climate resilience and overall stability in terms of their own profits and growth, seeing the opportunity and getting in early.
100%. I think that what's really powerful about this story is that we're not talking about a just transition in the built environment in an intellectualized way. It's not about us fabricating a business case. You can hear in people's voices how they articulate their own needs. And I think that there's no business strategy that is as resilient as the business strategy that is directly aligned with people's needs. You will forever have a stable demand if you are able to fulfill people's needs, if you bring social value through your entrepreneurial activity.
And what is the scale that has been achieved so far to give everyone a sense of size?
So in terms of units, across Catalonia at present, there are approximately 60 cooperative housing projects that comprise more or less 1,000 flats or houses in various stages of development. Then with respect to the housing associations, which again, let's remember that they didn't exist 10 years ago. Housing associations are currently managing approximately 5,000 units. And it's expected that they will be able to increase these numbers by 1,600 more units in the coming years. Again, we need to understand that there's public policies that they may not have been the, let's say, most important aspect of the story that we're telling, but they are very important. And for example, there's been a specific public policy that has been an agreement between subnational governments and these kinds of housing providers that have a social purpose that since it started in 2020, it has enabled these kinds of housing providers to build more houses and to retrofit more houses, offering them favorable conditions in terms of accessing land, but also in terms of accessing resources, including finance. And this is actually allowing these providers to estimate that in the coming period, they'll be able to create over 1,000 new homes, both in terms of rental contracts, but also in terms of cooperative forms of tenure in less than a decade. We're talking about the lives of pretty much 6,000 people being drastically improved by these projects. So taking into account that this is only the beginning of the system, I believe that this story is really telling us things that we should be taking into account and that we should be watching out for and that we should be supporting.
Ainara, thank you. Not only for, I think, recognizing the lessons that this system offers the world, but also really showing us that a just transition in the built environment begins with understanding people's needs and using a city's decarbonization journey to meet them. So let's hear from the public, the private sector, and social actors who are making this vision real. And please note, this story is voiced by AI.
Catalonia's housing revolution, where affordability meets sustainability. An alternative housing system is emerging across Catalonia, aiming to tackle the housing affordability and climate crises simultaneously. Although still in its infancy, the system's success, grounded in the collaboration of public, private, and social actors, could set an invaluable blueprint for achieving a just climate transition in the global housing sector. When it comes to being evicted from your home, it's the weight that kills you. At least that was Adama's experience. She and her family had lived a comfortable 4 years in her modest flat in the El Clou neighborhood of central Barcelona, until one day her landlord quadrupled her rent. Unable to pay, Adama appealed the eviction in the courts, arguing she had never previously missed a payment and the increase was unreasonable. The legal process was drawn out over almost 3 years. "It's a living nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy," she says. "You don't know if you'll be out on the streets tomorrow. You can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't live." Adama had moved her husband and 2 children to Spain from her native Guinea-Bissau in 2004, seeking advanced medical support for her chronic mobility problems. Her flat was old, mold crept up the bathroom tiles, and in summer the indoor temperature could easily top 35 degrees Celsius. But it was home. Until it wasn't. Adama lost her appeal and the family had to move out. Adama's story is far from rare. Rents in Barcelona have risen 68% on average over the past decade, driven by over-liberalisation of the housing market and growing influxes of tourist rentals like Airbnb. And the wages of the lower-income families have failed to keep up. On top of that, 80% of Spanish homes are energy inefficient and poorly insulated, and the poorest often live in energy poverty, trying to service their extortionate utility bills. Barcelona, in particular, is increasingly feeling the brunt of rising temperatures, with summers now characterized by 40-degree heat and stifling humidity. "We are already affected by climate change here," attests Adama. Like most countries, Spain is desperately trying to retrofit, refurbish, and renovate its housing stock to align it with its net zero emissions target by mid-century. Yet, the costly construction works these new sustainability standards require can often raise housing prices beyond the means of society's poorest. But there is little for them to fall back on. Just 2% of the country's housing stock is classified as social or affordable housing, compared to an EU average of 9% and over 30% in countries like the Netherlands. Barcelona has become the poster child for a global housing crisis, fast sweeping across most developed economies, culminating in a spate of anti-tourism protests. According to OECD data, housing prices have outpaced income growth in most developed economies since the 2000s. But across the world, housing systems everywhere are buckling and more than 1.6 billion people now lack access to adequate housing, according to the United Nations Human Settlements Programme, UN Habitat. From New York to Nairobi, London to Lahore, rents are soaring and home ownership is becoming a pipe dream for the young and working classes. The crisis is most acute in Europe. Across the EU, average rents rose by 20% in the last decade, while home purchase prices increased by 50%. But housing isn't just a social issue, it's an environmental concern too. After factoring in construction and operation, the built environment is the source of 40% of the world's carbon dioxide, CO2, emissions. So any attempts to solve the housing crisis must factor in the sustainability concerns, with the two aims often in conflict. Affordability coming at the cost of sustainability and vice versa. Simply building more housing will not suffice. One recent study indicates that the maximum number of houses that can be built within the carbon budget per year would be around 176,000 for the whole of Europe. But Barcelona's parent region of Catalonia is proving Plato's adage that necessity is the mother of invention, and is brewing something different. A new housing model is emerging quietly but resolutely across the region, one that prioritizes people's needs over profits. Rather than driven by a single actor or institution, this new model is advanced by collaboration between local and regional authorities, non-profit housing associations, tenant cooperatives, enabler platforms and private sector firms, perhaps better described as an organic ecosystem than an intentional system. And it treats housing not as a speculative financial commodity, but as essential social infrastructure, aiming to provide truly adequate housing to its entire population, namely, affordable, sustainable, and climate resilient. Housing is a human right, says Joan Ramon Riera, Housing Commissioner at the Barcelona City Council. But it's also a lever for climate action, for economic inclusion, for public health. The question is, who do we build for, and how? Adama lives in Barcelona's Sant Andreu district. Her apartment is adorned with photos of her family, African artwork, and images of Barcelona's iconic footballers. The flat is cool and breezy despite the suffocating humidity outside. It's cool in the summers and warm in the winters, she says gratefully. The building is Casa Bloc, a 1930s modernist complex that lay derelict for years before being restored by the housing association Habitat 3, a non-profit that provides social housing and other housing options like shared ownership homes at affordable rents. Triple-glazed windows keep the noise and heat out. A communal heat pump system provided in collaboration with energy giant Ariston and telecom company Cellnex cuts bills and carbon. Now we have peace, Adama says. It's not just a flat. It's our home. It's places like Casa Bloc where Catalonia's vision for an alternative, needs-based housing system is coming to life, born of a unique collaboration between public, private and social actors. Financed with EU climate funds, managed by a non-profit housing association, renovated by private businesses, and made feasible and affordable by progressive public planning policy. This kind of cross-sector cooperation is unprecedented in Spain, says Natalia Martinez, Director of Partnerships at Habitat 3, and it's what makes the Catalan model work. The building now houses 17 families who, like Adama's, were at risk of homelessness, some fleeing domestic violence, others recovering from long-term illnesses. What unites them is they were all at risk of falling through the crack between the private rental market and public services. Habitat 3 offers them not just housing, but wraparound social support, funded through a blend of philanthropic public and private capital. According to Maria Vasilescu, former deputy mayor of Vienna and a housing advisor to the EU mission on climate-neutral and smart cities, what makes Catalonia stand out is the emergence of a comprehensive ecosystem of stakeholders. They are not just building projects, they are building institutions, she says. And those institutions are redefining what housing can be: green, inclusive, permanent, dignified. This is what a just transition in the built environment looks like. The history. Key milestones in the emergence of the system. During the 20th century, Spain's government had invested heavily in developing viviendas de protección oficial, VPOs, affordable homes with capped prices designed to help the Spanish population get on the housing ladder. These VPOs were subsidized by the government, built by private developers, and purchased by lower-income families who had registered to access them at affordable prices fixed by the government. The VPOs were a major mechanism in lifting Spanish families out of poverty and consolidating a middle class in the country after the Spanish Civil War. However, the owners of the VPOs were allowed to sell them on the private housing market after a certain amount of years. Hence, by the turn of the millennium, most of the VPOs had been sold off to the private market, and the country was left with one of the lowest proportions of social or affordable housing in Europe. When the global financial crisis hit in 2008, Spain was uniquely exposed. In the preceding decade, it had built more homes than the UK, Germany and France combined, with real estate powering 18% of GDP growth. The bursting of the property bubble had devastating consequences, with 3.5 million homes standing empty and 500,000 families turfed onto the streets. The financial crisis exposed the fragility of Spain's housing model, which had long prioritized home ownership, often linked to speculative intentions, over rental or social housing. This model was reinforced by policies that encouraged buying, recalls Ivo Valdivielso, CEO of the labour inclusion charity Mansol Project. When the housing bubble burst, mass evictions followed, and banks accumulated thousands of empty homes. Public outrage ensued, and in 2009, grassroots movement La Plataforma de Afectados por la Hipoteca, PAH, was born in Barcelona, blocking evictions and campaigning for housing to be treated as a human right rather than a financial commodity. Meanwhile, Catalonia's long tradition of cooperativism was waking up. The region's social and solidarity economy, an informal movement of citizen-led cooperatives, foundations and mutual aid organizations, was emerging as an intermediary alternative to the failing duopoly of market and state. There was a realization that neither the private sector nor public institutions could meet basic needs, says José Tellez of Sostre Civic, a cooperative housing organization. So we started to build something new, from the ground up. One of the first innovations came from Habitat 3, which offered landlords of vacant flats an unconventional deal. Habitat 3 would rent their properties as social housing and in return guarantee rental income, cover renovations and manage the tenancy. And these renovations would be carried out by social enterprises, training marginalized workers, providing dual social benefits. By 2015, Habitat 3 had secured hundreds of flats across Catalonia. It was a triple win, for tenants, for owners, for society, says Martinez. The cooperatives were busy innovating too. In 2011, Sostre Civic launched its first grant-of-use co-housing project, inspired by models in Uruguay and Northern Europe. Instead of renting or owning, residents collectively held rights and co-managed the building, encouraging democratic governance, long-term affordability, and ecological design, with environmental sustainability representing a key pillar of its mission. Completed in 2018, Barcelona's La Borda became a flagship project, a near-zero-emission, timber-framed building constructed with participatory methods and funded by Built by Nature, a grant-making fund dedicated to accelerating the timber building transformation in Europe. As the movement matured, the actors institutionalized. Sostre Civic established La Constructiva in 2016, an in-house construction cooperative dedicated to sustainable building and fair labor practices. We needed to take control of the supply chain to match our values, says Tellez. And new social actors cropped up to service the growing needs of this burgeoning ecosystem, including cooperative architects, engineers, and financiers. The public authorities began to take notice. In 2015, PAH co-founder Ada Colau was elected as the first female mayor of Barcelona, promising to tackle the city's pernicious housing crisis. And in 2018, the Catalan Housing Agency launched the right of first refusal framework, allowing municipalities to buy foreclosed homes before private buyers and assign them to non-profit housing associations, which were also equipped with subsidised finance from the Catalan Institute of Finance, ICF. Properties were granted on 75-year leaseholds to ensure long-term affordability and eventual return to the public stock. 2 years later, Barcelona City Council, which plays a leading role in Catalonia's housing system by implementing municipal policies, collaborating with the Catalan government through joint bodies, managing its own public housing stock, and providing direct support services to residents, built on this collaboration by launching the ESAL agreement. This allowed housing associations to bypass competitive tendering and access 99-year surface rights to build affordable homes on public land. That changed everything, says Sergio Rodriguez, Director of Housing Association La Fundació Habitatge Social. It allowed us to plan, to grow, and to build at scale. Between 2020 and 2025, Catalonia saw a spate of developments: eco-certified senior residences in Terrassa, accessible homes for people with intellectual disabilities, youth-led renovations in Sant Antoni de Calonge. Bougie beach town Sitges became a surprising hub for ESAL-backed social housing, with 4 housing associations delivering coordinated projects. The financing methods evolved and democratized. The cooperatives and housing associations turned to crowdlending, community bonds, and hybrid capital stacks, mixing private and public money, with ethical banks and impact investors entering the space. Similarly, construction methods diversified too. Modular housing, building homes in factory-controlled conditions in sections, which are then transported to a site and assembled, decreasing the cost and time of construction, timber structures, timber is a renewable resource, and trees sequester carbon dioxide, and passive design, an architectural approach that uses natural energy sources like the sun, wind, and temperature differences to heat, cool, and light buildings, reducing the need for mechanical systems and lowering energy consumption, became common. We're not just talking about energy savings, says Jean Vidal Arambelet, an architect at cooperative architecture firm Cellobert. These are buildings that promote community and resilience. Eventually, institutional recognition came rolling in. In 2019, Casa Bloc won the prestigious World Habitat Award. In 2022, the Catalan Parliament passed a resolution calling for a regulatory framework for cooperative housing. And in May 2025, the Spanish Congress Housing Committee voted in favour of a national policy supporting the model. Meanwhile, the Catalan regional government launched Plan 50,000, a pledge to build 50,000 public housing units by 2030, many of which would be co-produced with non-profit developers. An embryonic breeding ground gradually grew into a self-supporting ecosystem. Municipalities began allocating land proactively. Barcelona integrated ESALs into long-term housing strategies. Cohabitac, a coalition of housing associations, became a formal policy interlocutor. We were no longer a fringe, says Xavier Lopez, manager of Cohabitac. We had institutional leverage. And importantly, this wasn't just a novel experiment of Barcelona's progressive elites. In rural Garrotxa, crowd-funded cooperatives took root. In Manresa, passive houses sprang up. In the metropolitan belt, rental flats were retrofitted for aging populations. The movement expanded into the territories, becoming a vehicle for regional equity and resilience. Between 2022 to 2025, the advocacy efforts of NGOs and think tanks gained crucial ground. Legal reforms accelerated. Climate debates reframed housing as part of the ecological transition, and policymakers began using just transition language to describe housing in order to frame the shift as a systemic, justice-centered transformation, one that mirrored the social and ecological ambitions of the just transition in climate and labour fields. This established housing as a human right, called for democratically planned systemic change, and enabled local actors to connect their efforts with broader global debates and resources. We were confronting multiple emergencies, says Joan Ramon Riera, Barcelona's housing commissioner, and this model, inclusive, democratic and green, addressed them all. Granted, today Catalonia's needs-based housing system is still mouse-like in the face of the elephantine proportions of the prevailing market-driven model. Cohabitac, the umbrella organisation for the housing associations, still only manages 10% of Catalonia's social rental housing stock. Yet the alternative system has grown phoenix-like out of the ashes of the 2008 crisis to become a credible contender in the institutional fabric. We're no longer in the pilot phase, says Enric Fabra, technical secretary of Cohabitac. We've built not just prototypes, but repeatable pathways. The ingredients: housing as a right, climate action as social policy, collaboration as method. Catalonia is now littered with new housing developments, retrofits and renovations that attest to the growing import of this needs-based system, each project boasting its own unique social purpose and sustainability measures. In place of speculative developers and exploitative landlords, this novel coterie of public, private and social actors are teaming up to produce housing around three principles of need: affordability, inclusivity, and climate adequacy. These actors aren't looking for quick returns, rather the long-term sustainable development of their territories and populaces. They're looking to build the real economy, rather than the purely financial one. They prioritise cooperation over competition, and, above all, aim to instill dignified living into each of their projects. These actors broadly fall into two categories: shapers, who deliver, manage, and service the developments, and enablers, who work to advance broader growth of the system. Chief among the shapers are the housing associations, such as Cohabitac members, Fundació Habitat 3, Fundació Habitat G Social, Fundació Salas, Fundación Familia y Bienestar, and Fundació New Lloc. With a broader role than housing associations in other countries, they build, retrofit, and manage sustainable social rental housing, and often provide social care to the residents. Then there are the cooperatives, such as Habicoop and Sostra Civic, non-profit legal entities that own or rent property for its members, who are also tenants, who decide how the property will be run. Similarly, there are the cooperative firms like Kelleber or La Constructiva, who provide services like architecture, design, and construction to the system. And finally, you have the private companies, like Fundación Naturgy, Ariston, Cellnex, Arcanova, Omplim, Grupo Salas, who provide their services on a limited profit basis to the project developers or managers. On the enablers side, there are civil society organisations such as the Tenants' Union of Catalonia and the Catalan Observatory of Human Rights, advocating for the right to adequate housing through civic mobilisation. There are NGOs that support cooperatives and housing associations through direct support or through advocacy for a more enabling policy environment, including Cohabitac, Xarxa Economia, Social y Solidaria, and PEMB. There are the public authorities that provide enabling policy and access to land, such as local housing offices, city councils, mayors, the regional government, and municipalities. And there are the financial institutions who provide impact capital, generating a measurable social or environmental impact alongside a financial return for the projects, including Institut Catalán de Finanzas, Instituto de Crédito Oficial, Triodos Bank, and Fiare Banca Etica. The new system caters to different tiers of Catalan society. Although not designed exclusively along these lines, the social rentals run by housing associations tend to address the needs of the marginalised, whereas the cooperatives are typically occupied by middle-class residents, each group facing different levels of affordability and climate adequacy concerns. Ultimately, we believe housing should be the fifth pillar of the welfare state, alongside healthcare, education, pensions, and social services, says Habitat 3's Carm Trilla, who is also president of Cohabitac. It is a sentiment shared by Barcelona Housing Commissioner Riera. Spain currently spends 7.5% of its GDP on healthcare, 4.5% of education, and a mere 0.2% on housing. But the cost of housing for the population ends up undermining the other pillars of the welfare state, argues Trilla. Private companies have an important role to play in the housing system, but it should be as service providers rather than managers and owners, as they do in areas like healthcare. The projects born of Catalonia's new housing system take manifold form. Take Adames Llar Casa Block in Sant Andreu, a once-dormant wing of Sir Antores Clave's rationalist icon. In 2020, Habitat teamed up with social services and carved 17 small flats designed for around 40 occupants out of the structure. Telecoms firm Cellnex wired the building to narrow the digital divide. The Naturgy Foundation helped tackle energy poverty through energy management training and financial support. Ariston donated hybrid hot water units that cut bills and emissions. Residents pay social rents. Support is on site but non-intrusive. The architecture restores dignity of comfortable living. The result is conspicuously low carbon and high care, and, crucially, replicable. For Habitat 3's Martinez, the point is simple. We are showing that housing can be stable, supportive, and low carbon at the same time. Paqui Luna, Habitat 3's technical lead, insists. The building is a demonstration, not a pilot. It's meant to set a pattern others can copy. 30 minutes south of Barcelona in Sitges, two new developments, Marinada, 43 homes, and Terral, 63 homes, show that social developers can deliver affordable climate-friendly housing at pace. Sitges is one of the most expensive rental markets in Catalonia, around €18 per square metre on average, says Marina Gallego, president of housing association Fundació Grup Qualitat. In these developments, we got that down to €6 per square metre. Fundació Salas served as social developer. The municipality provided land and political support, and Fundació Grup Qualitat, New Lloc and Família I Benestar Social, FIBS, now manage the rentals. The buildings carry AA energy ratings, communal heat pumps and solar energy systems, careful orientation, and the kind of shading and cross-ventilation that keep flats comfortable through Mediterranean summers come as standard. For Marinada resident Jordi, a retired butcher, the development meant that he was able to stay in his hometown. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to afford to live here anymore. Prices have gone up so much, he says. Now I save money on my bills, and I'm a lot more comfortable in the winters and summers. In Sant Feliu de Llobregat, a satellite town west of Barcelona, the Adela Barquin residence, 90 flats, reframes aging not as a clinical condition, but as an urban design brief. It's a rental building for independent people over 65 who want to live with support and community, explains director and social worker Laura Parado. There is a concierge on weekdays, shared spaces, activities from morning to evening, and a rent of roughly €500, compared to the average Barcelona rent of €1,193. This is enough to be sustainable for the housing association, yet low enough to be affordable for the residents. The building embeds active aging principles, smaller, manageable flats, comfortable insulation and circulation, programs that create chance encounters and community, and a support team that is present but not paternalistic. The result is a building that reduces downstream health and care costs while giving people an age-in-place path that is conspicuously absent in most Spanish cities. It is about aging with autonomy, says Josep Maria Puig, president of Fundació Família Paz e Benestar Social, the foundation managing the property. The building was designed with a passive approach, an ultra-low energy method aiming to create a comfortable indoor temperature using minimal conventional heating or cooling. Its air zone technology, powered by rooftop solar panels, reuses air to heat and cool the building. I used to feel incredibly isolated in my old flat, and I would also dread the sweltering heat of the summers, says retired fishmonger Lucia. But now I don't even notice the temperature anymore, and I feel part of a real community. And in the Roquettes neighbourhood of northern Barcelona, Cirer's building has become a flagship of the cooperative housing movement, a timber-framed building containing 32 dwellings, apartments, flats, and community spaces distributed over 8 floors, developed by Sostre Civic on land granted by Barcelona City Council. Storing 660 tonnes of carbon in its wood structure, Cirer's won the Sustainability Prize at the 2022 Advanced Architecture Awards. We have a central aerothermal system that distributes heat and cold throughout the building, explains Celobert engineer David Fernandez Gutierrez. And each private space also has a dual-flow ventilation system with a heat recovery unit. As a result, the interior temperature is maintained and much less energy is consumed. This is a win-win for both residents and the environment. It is the first time in my life that I've found the Barcelona summers bearable, reports Homera, a tenant of 4 years. The project has also become an exemplar of collaboration amongst this social and solidarity economy. Built by La Constructiva, the design was led by Celobert, building and works insurance by ARS, cooperative planning by Matriu, legal advice by Collectiu Ronda, economic and fiscal support by Gestio Integral, with the building financed by Fiare, Banca Etica. It's really about living in a building rather than just a flat, says tenant Eva. This kind of community living is the perfect antidote to the loneliness epidemic that exists in cities like Barcelona. And in Saint-Ildefonse, a 1960s neighbourhood in the municipality of Cornellà de Llobregat, the lens pans out to a whole district-scale retrofitting. Daniel Broto, Director of Land and Housing in Cornellà de Llobregat, calls it an operation in social surgery, done block by block, family by family. Targeting 45% energy savings, 49 buildings comprising 1,113 flats are being upgraded. Insulation, new lifts and balconies, efficient windows, and rooftop solar. The funding is a layered blend of next-generation EU grants, ELENA, European Local Energy Assistance, technical assistance, and European Investment Bank debt, exactly the type of layered finance a lower-income community needs to make deep energy renovation possible. The Metropolitan Housing Consortium and the Cornellà Council sequence works block by block, with Celobert architects and mediators sitting through owner community meetings that last late into weeknights. We talk about thermal bridges in stairwells, and people understand because it is their bills at stake, notes architect Jordi Carbó. Grants and concessional loans cover most capex. Owners contribute a share based on means and levels of participation. Contractors are bound by social clauses for community input into the design and planning of the projects. Scaffolding alternates to minimize displacement. I can't wait for the work to be completed. My flat is going to be so much more comfortable to live in and beautiful to look at, says Irene Faye Fayol, a local resident. These projects represent a mere handful of the threads that make up the rich tapestry of Catalonia's needs-based housing system. Each has its own place and purpose, but share the same primary ingredients: public land or acquisition, mission-driven developers, grant-of-use cooperatives, or social rental tenure. light social support, fabric first, decarbonisation, improving the basic structure and envelope of the unit. The approach is repetitive but flexible, able to adapt to the given context, whether it's gentrification in Sitges or decaying 60s tower blocks in Cornellà. The report card. Impressive results, but challenges persist. And the impacts are starting to feed into the numbers. Across Catalonia, there are around 60 cooperative housing projects comprising 1,000 flats or houses in various stages of development. Cohabitax housing associations also manage around 5,000 units across the region, which they forecast will increase by 1,600 in the coming years. And since its inception in 2020, Conveni ISAL has supported over 20 projects, with the aim of creating over 1,000 homes, rental and cooperative, in 10 years. Indicators of the system's emissions savings are also beginning to materialise. For instance, according to data from the Catalan Institute of Energy, the retrofits completed between 2020 and 2024 are saving an estimated 18,000 tonnes of CO2 annually. And energy poverty is decreasing in the participating neighbourhoods. Households once spending 20% of income on utilities now spend less than 10%. One Barcelona city report found that for every euro spent on retrofits, saved €2.30 in health costs and energy subsidies, demonstrating the multiplier effect that climate action often has on social equity. If you find the right solutions, the social and the environmental impacts are often mutually reinforcing, says Angel Perez, Director of Energy Management Company, Salus Green Power. Compared to Vienna, Europe's gold standard for public housing, Catalonia's numbers are modest, but impressive given its late start. And with a quarter of all its residents living in cooperative housing, Zurich provides an inspiration for what scale could look like for Catalonia's nascent system. There have also been benefits for Spain's hard-hit construction industry. In the 5 years after the 2008 crash, the country's construction industry lost 64% of its workforce and has never recovered. As well as adding projects to the industry's pipeline, Catalonia's alternative housing system is also recruiting and skilling a new workforce. The cooperatives and housing associations give priority for renovations and construction work to labour inclusion organisations like Mansol Projectes, a social enterprise that trains and employs people with disabilities and those at risk of exclusion to provide energy efficiency renovations in housing projects. For years, speculative housing shaped the direction of the construction sector, says Ivo Valdivielso, CEO of Mansol. We're proud to be part of a fair and dignified alternative that puts people and purpose at the centre of the supply chain. Mansol has trained more than 400 workers in 3 years, many of whom have gone on to secure permanent, higher-paid positions elsewhere. Their training now extends to renewable energy installations, creating a workforce skilled not only in housing but also in the broader green economy, an essential element for any economy given the already vast and fast-growing global green skills shortage. 3 years ago, Nacho, 53, was living on the streets trying to manage a drug addiction. Today he is living in his own flat and is one of Mansol's most productive employees. I got lost in my life for a while and found myself with nothing, he recalls. Mansol was my salvation. Catalonia's new housing model, however, is far from the finished article. If it is to thrive in the long term and offer a credible alternative to the prevailing market-driven system, it must overcome a number of formidable challenges. Affordability is a perennial concern. With construction costs continuing to rise and land values remaining high, rents have to balance out costs for viability. Similarly, sustainability can often be in conflict with affordability, with budgets often compelling compromises on materials or systems. Housing associations and cooperatives are also stretching the capacity of their relatively small teams and can't recruit fast enough to meet the growing demand. Similarly, skills shortages in the construction industry threaten to curtail momentum, with the industry's low wages often failing to attract the next generation of labourers. And with the EU's next-gen funding tapering off in 2026 with no guarantee of replacement, ongoing finance remains uncertain. Furthermore, persistent regulatory hurdles allow landlords to convert regulated rentals into seasonal contracts, undercutting rent caps and leaving families in precarious arrangements. Many municipalities are also still to embrace the new model, and many private developers still consider social housing as a CSR obligation to fudge. There is also a risk of feeding green gentrification, where the addition of sustainable housing increases the desirability and, consequently, rents in a neighbourhood, pushing out low-income residents. Indeed, tenant advocates argue that without affirming rent stabilisation, the needs-based system could be undone. If policy doesn't keep pace with practice, we risk social innovations serving only a lucky few, says Carme Arcarazo, policy strategist and housing researcher at IDRA, Barcelona Urban Research Institute and spokesperson for the Barcelona Tenants Union. We need more hands, better wages, and more respect if we want to build a just transition. And for those countries struggling to get a handle on their own housing crises, beware of the temptation to oversimplify the problem as a mere imbalance of supply and demand. In Catalonia and Spain as a whole, the years of the housing construction boom also oversaw the fastest rise in prices. Spain has become the poster child of Europe's housing crisis, despite boasting one of the highest housing stocks per capita in the OECD, with more than 550 homes per 1,000 people. It is therefore essential to distinguish between real demand, driven by the need for homes, and investment demand, which often fuels speculation at the expense of social and environmental needs. Across Catalonia, most visibly in Barcelona, housing has been increasingly used for tourism, seasonal stays, or, left vacant, inflating market activity without improving access to homes. So, as well as building new housing, it is also essential to ensure the existing stock is both effectively used and physically improved so it provides affordable, sustainable, and climate-resilient homes for real people rather than for investment portfolios. Yes to more housing, but the right kind of housing, concludes Arcarazo. We need to return housing to its original purpose. We need to change the rules of the game to prioritize needs over profits. Retaining the current momentum is a fragile balance. It can tip forward into systemic change or backward into a failed experiment. But to guarantee the former, according to the representative of PEM's housing mission, Luisa Pinto, these actors must maintain the underlying ethic: housing as a right, climate action as social policy, and collaboration as method. Achieving scale, from alternative model to mainstream. None of these challenges are insurmountable. Catalonia's unlikely coalition of public, private, and social actors are proving that a needs-based approach can not only take root, but flourish. The question that remains, however, is how to scale this alternative model for it to become a viable alternative to the prevailing one, and what lessons can be taken from Catalonia to help tackle housing crises currently unfurling the world over, from San Francisco to Sydney. The pressing issue in Catalonia is bolstering the legislative framework so that it supports a needs-based approach, as opposed to a speculative one. Grassroots activists have learned from bitter experience how hard-fought victories must be protected from backsliding. The Catalan regional government introduced rent caps in 2020, only for them to be reversed by Spain's constitutional court shortly after. A national housing law then passed in 2023, reasserting the region's right to introduce rent caps in stressed areas. Similarly, Barcelona City Council famously banned new holiday rental licenses to crack down on Airbnb-style short-term tourist lets, only for landlords to find a loophole using 11-month temporary rental leases to attract high-paying digital nomads and foreign students, further inflating rental prices for locals. What we need is not only rent control on a portion of the market, we need the entire market under rent control, says Arcarazo, including mid-term rentals, co-livings, room rentals. Otherwise, we have massive loopholes. This would mean open-ended leases that provide renters stability and bans on purely speculative purchases by actors who have no social or climate purpose. Indeed, without such protections, tenants may resist green renovations because they could result in rent hikes. But with them, they have more of an incentive to support, push for, and sometimes even pay for the improvements, which would ultimately drive forward to the transition. The public authorities appear to be listening. In September, the national government announced 53,000 illegal tourist apartments, including 7,700 in Catalonia, would be deregistered and put on the long-term rental market. Barcelona City Council is also moving to crack down on 11-month temporary rental licenses, and Catalan President Salvador Illa recently announced plans to tackle the region's housing crisis using all possible public-private collaborations, aiming to build 214,000 new homes in the coming years, 40% of which will be official affordable housing. When the market doesn't work, we have to intervene, announced Illa in an October 2025 speech. Furthermore, the passing of Spain's first national housing law in 2023, enabling rent caps and new funds for social housing, suggests the formation of a new political consensus. The next big question mark is over funding. Much of Catalonia's spate of needs-based development has been funded by the EU's Next Gen Recovery Facility, which injected hundreds of millions of euros into housing rehab and construction. Those funds are set to expire by mid-2026, potentially creating a funding vacuum. It is imperative to ensure a continuation of available funds to consolidate this emerging system, notes Francisco Fernandez Arias, Director of Housing Assets Management of housing association Fundació Habitat Guí Social. The Catalan government is lobbying Madrid and Brussels to plug the gap, and there have been some promising signals. Spain's housing ministry recently proposed a dedicated €7 billion programme over 4 years, 2025 to 2028, to sustain social housing development. But activists say more is required. Triller suggests public funding of housing must increase from 0.2% to 1% of GDP, equating to billions of euros, for the momentum to be sustained. In one encouraging development, Sostra Civic last year secured a landmark €31 million loan from the Council of Europe Development Bank, backed by InvestEU, to build 350 new energy-efficient homes, demonstrating that traditional development finance offers a new avenue of funding for housing cooperatives. "We just thought, why not?" recalls Maria Sigüenza, CEB's country manager for Spain. Now, we're definitely keen to finance more cooperatives, as housing is one of our key focus areas. The transactions just have to be over a certain size. And finally, the capacity and coordination of the needs-based system must be expanded, as none of the stakeholder groups, public, private, or social, have the resources to do it alone. This requires new and creative partnership structures. One such innovation is the Habitage Metropolis Barcelona scheme, a metropolitan public-private company co-founded in 2020 by the Catalan government, Barcelona City Council, and 2 private firms. The joint venture is 50% publicly funded and 50% private, with profits and risks split evenly. It builds affordable rental flats on public land, which will, importantly, stay in public hands, thereby remaining affordable forever. These efforts must also be further decentralised, notes Pinto, PEM's housing representative. Beyond the city of Barcelona, the wider metropolitan area includes 160 municipalities where 5 million people live, many confronting the same housing pressures. but only the 36 core city councils have a coordinated housing consortium to help administer programmes like the EU Next Gen funds. Smaller towns are often left struggling with housing offices of 2 or 3 people to apply for grants and manage projects, says Pinto. For its needs-based system to be a success in the long run, Catalonia will need to build up capacity across all regions, expanding metropolitan consortia and sharing technical resources, so that no town is left behind for want of expertise or staff. It's a Herculean challenge, but the momentum of recent years has given optimists belief that a paradigm shift in housing is achievable. Lessons in replicability: a global just transition in housing. And while Catalonia forges a path forward, there will be many watching with keen interest from elsewhere in the world. Catalonia's model is born of a unique set of circumstances: the 2008 foreclosure crisis, the tourist gentrification of Barcelona, and the EU Green Recovery Agenda. Nonetheless, the underlying principle of decommodified, needs-based housing is one that could be applied anywhere. And, with their own novel twist on the concept, countries like Uruguay, Denmark, and Austria are doing just that. Since the 1960s, Uruguay has become a pioneer of the cooperative housing movement, with cooperatives boasting 5% of the national housing stock. As in Catalonia, the Uruguayan government supports the co-ops with low-interest loans and access to public land, recognizing that this partnership dramatically improves housing access. Similarly, in Denmark, around 7% of the population live in cooperative housing, rising to around a third in Copenhagen, allowing many middle-income families to live comfortably in a high-cost city. As with the Catalan equivalents, Danish coops traditionally limit equity growth to keep units affordable across generations. And in Austria, the Vienna model has become the gold standard for social housing. Decades of targeted public investment and avoiding the allure of mass privatization means that today, nearly 60% of Viennese residents live in housing that is either municipally owned or subsidized by the city. Considering housing as essential infrastructure, like hospitals and schools, the city's policy of retaining ownership of land and ploughing public money into construction has kept rents far below other European capitals. Catalonia has undoubtedly learnt from these forerunners. But where the Danes, Uruguayans and Austrians can learn from the Catalan approach is in its marriage of affordable housing policy with a drive towards sustainability of the built environment, which offers the potential to serve as a blueprint for a just housing transition worldwide. This twin transition of the social and environmental is something many aspire to, but are universally struggling to achieve. Although still early days, Catalonia is demonstrating how it can be done. Along with Vienna, Catalonia's model is probably the most progressive approach to affordable and social housing anywhere in the world, says Vasilicu. Where Catalonia builds on Vienna's success is by tying in the sustainability side, and doing it not only in new constructions but also in renovating and retrofitting old buildings too. Tübingen and Hamburg, Germany, Lisbon, Portugal, and cities across Switzerland are already drawing inspiration from the Catalan model, according to Vasilicu. The model is perhaps most applicable to cities struggling with the same conditions as Barcelona: low public housing stock, surging rental and sale prices, and a construction sector faced with the challenge of bridging labour shortage, modernisation, and increasing productivity. In Rome, for instance, long-term rental stock is being lost to short-term letting, tourism accommodation, and speculative conversions, with affordability declining as a result. In Athens, tourism and second-home demand is increasing rents and weakening access for local residents, and in Lisbon, tourism and investment-driven tenancy is inflating rents. In each of these cities, social housing makes up less than 5% of the housing stock. One of the most important lessons to take from the Catalan experience is that culture and collaboration matters just as much as cement and euros. But in that lies a number of questions about exactly whose responsibility it is to provide affordable and sustainable housing. And there are some key takeaways for each group of stakeholders involved: public, private, and social alike. For public authorities, Catalonia demonstrates the importance of taking an active quarterbacking role. The government doesn't have to build every home, but it does have to define the rules of the game and provide early capital to tilt the scales toward affordability. Practically, that means things like renting out public land cheaply to cooperative or limited profit developers, proffering public funds or EU grants as seed money in mixed finance projects, and applying social conditions to each euro of sustainable investment. That also means wielding regulatory power boldly, taxing abusive speculators, mandating inclusionary zoning. Barcelona now requires 30% of big new developments to be affordable housing, or enforcing rent caps across all rental types. These moves will inevitably confront legal challenges and political blowback, but such bold public policy will create a space in the housing system for communities and mission-driven actors to move into. Housing policy is made in a wide variety of departments, notes Arcarazo, pointing out that decisions on tourism, finance, and taxation all impact housing. The public sector must therefore adopt a cross-departmental vision of housing as social infrastructure, coordinating economic, environmental, and social policies toward the common goal of adequate housing for all. For social actors, the Catalan model shows the power of ground-up collective action. Catalonia's housing revolution simply would not have happened without the years of grassroots campaigning from tenants' unions, the Plataforma de Afectados por la Hipoteca movement, cooperative activists, and neighbourhood assemblies. This forced authorities to act. The historic march of 170,000 people for housing rights in Barcelona in 2024 is credited with spurring new rent control measures and seeded the institutions that are now delivering solutions. Indeed, the cooperatives and housing associations that grew out of that movement measure success not in profits, but in how many people they can house and emissions they can cut. They have shown a remarkable ability to partner across sectors and cut through old silos, says Laura Castro Renard, Communications and Press Manager of the Third Social Sector Organisations Board of Catalonia. A housing association might manage flats owned by the city, or a cooperative might borrow from an ethical bank, or partner with a private construction firm. This messy cooperation is a feature, not a bug, of the system, allowing each actor to contribute their strengths, be it funding, technical know-how, or community trust. The lesson for civil society everywhere is clear: to organise and build coalitions ready to capitalise on any window of opportunity that allows progress on rights and social transformation, says Pilar Bosch, Director of Housing Association Fundació Sahar. These social actors also serve as the system's conscience, continually driving the endeavour to stay true to the mission of decommodification. They remind everyone that the aim is not just to create homes, but to redefine housing as a human right and a public good. And for the private sector, the Catalan model offers a vision of a different way of doing business, one that embraces the notion of doing well by doing good, as Jaume Rores, of impact investor Coyoacán puts it. This new cadre of developers and investors are finding that accepting reduced margins may make more business sense over the long term. For example, Grupo Salas, one of the region's largest developers, has adopted a policy of foregoing big-ticket projects in favour of volume and long-term stability. It accepts a more modest 4 to 6% return on investment and ploughs back the lion's share of its earnings into additional affordable projects. We offer 6%, but it's a social impact project, says Manel Rodriguez, partner and CEO of the Salas Group and honorary patron of the Salas Foundation, contrasting his model with the 12% returns private funds seek in typical projects. That 6% may seem low to the gilet-clad financiers of Wall Street or Zurich, but it has proven enough to attract impact investors. And because demand for affordable rentals is so high, Salas reports 100% occupancy and waiting lists, double or triple the available units. The business risk is palatable. In fact, Salas is growing rapidly by not exploiting its customers. Its success, alongside other social housing PPPs, public-private partnerships, is sending a message. Businesses can prosper through productive rather than speculative business models, says Rodriguez. It is a business model in which profit is modest but consistent. Developments are built to last, and value comes from scale and social license, as opposed to quick flips. Other private sector actors are also finding unexpected benefits in these partnerships. For instance, when heating systems company Ariston partnered with Habitat 3 to design a custom energy solution for the Casa Block retrofit, it ended up energizing its workforce. Solving a social challenge, heating a historic uninsulated building without altering its facade, pushed the company to create a new hybrid water heater technology that is now among the most efficient on the market. The company donated equipment and helped monitor indoor air comfort after the renovation, acquiring invaluable data about performance. The project also gave Ariston a compelling sustainability story to share with its network, aligning with its brand purpose. In a word, it motivated people, the engineers, the installers, and the executives, says Ana Sayeras, Ariston's product manager. As she observes, when a private company and a non-profit find a shared purpose, they can achieve a common goal neither could alone. And most importantly, it also got our foot in the door with an alternative housing system we think will offer many new business opportunities going forward, concludes Sayeras. Catalonia is teeming with such burgeoning partnerships, and the emerging consensus is that profit is acceptable, but only up to a point. This is often cited at around 5%, enough to entice private capital, but not of the predatory variety. The lesson here is one of restraint and long-term thinking. By reinvesting in communities and settling for sustainable returns, private firms can become productive partners, rather than the vampiric cowboys to which the housing sector is so often accustomed. Ultimately, the Catalan example is teaching the world that fixing the housing crisis, both socially and environmentally, is not just about euros or units, but about creating a cross-sectoral vision that transcends traditional silos. And at the core of the Catalan model is a set of fundamental ingredients: a vision of housing as a human right, a critical mass of people willing to fight for that vision, new processes and innovations to build and manage homes responsibly, and sustainability, and all the participants, tenants, developers, officials, builders, cooperating rather than competing to make it happen. As these ingredients simmer together, a new housing culture is brewing in Catalonia. It is a culture that views decent, climate-friendly housing as fundamental infrastructure for a just society. Although still too early to declare victory, Catalonia's needs-based housing revolution provides the most persuasive evidence yet of a rough roadmap toward achieving a just climate transition in the global housing sector. The sustainability renovations we do allow people and families without resources to come and live with dignity again, concludes Nacho of Mansol Projectes. The skills I've learned to do that are priceless to me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Voices, which is brought to you from the Institute for Human Rights and Business. Please remember to share and follow this podcast. That way you'll never miss an episode. And if you'd like to find out more about the work we all do at IHRB, then head to ihrb.org.